Hello, my name is Charles. I come from Nairobi, Kenya, and you probably heard my name by now. I've always been, I'll try avoid saying arms as often as possible. I don't know whether they'll cut that part out. I've always been fascinated by branding and identity since I was a kid. And I've read up on it, listened up on it. At the same time, the skills that I have are web and graphic design. However, well, you can add UI, UX design as well into the whole mix, and I've been a musician at some point. So what happens is when you have all these experiences and skills, you find a way of marrying that with whatever you're curious about. And in my case, I ended up in branding. Now, what I'd like to talk about today is what I'm calling interfaces, templates, and the future. Interfaces, templates, and the future, because these are the things I interact with on a daily basis, but more importantly, I'm curious about how other people interact with them as well, and what that does for them, and how it reflects identity in different ways. Now, if you can, close your eyes. Trust me, nothing will happen. Just close your eyes. Now, think of a post-apocalyptic world. So think of waking up in the middle of the end of, say, a disaster or a nuclear attack, or, well, you can think of a pandemic now that we've had one, but just close your eyes and think of waking up, and around you all you see is debris, and the idea is not to make you feel fear, but to make you think of how would a world after that look like? What are some of the first things you do, or the people around you do? I'd imagine that you first focus on, food, shelter, where you get your next, do you have clothes, where will you get your next meal? And of course, Wi-Fi, because, Wi-Fi is important. So you figure out how to reconnect Wi-Fi. Now, you can open your eyes, but the problem with that is I'd like you to close it again. Now imagine a future beyond you. Imagine the future your great-great-great-grandchildren will live in. And on the slides I hope someone shows the image of a flying spaceship that looks like a Vitz. So in your mind, what do you see in the future? What world are you living in? How does it look like? What are you interacting with? What are you feeling? What's most important to you then? Now, you can open your eyes. The idea is we have certain tools. We make decisions based on what we have, and then as we move, as we grow, and as our priorities change, and as the culture changes, we work with what we have at our disposal to create what we need, but sometimes even to imagine a future that we can have. Now, I hope that by the time we finish this, you can see how interfaces play a role in that world as you start out and in the future as you go along. Think of the clothes you wear. Why do you wear them? Why are you wearing what you're wearing right now? Why do you live in the house you live in? Why do you go where you go to? What do you spend your money on? And if you had your way, where would you be? And why would you be where you are? I'd like you to think of it as reflection that helps you sort of discover what's important to you and the experiences you've gone through. Cars in the 70s, for instance, had a sort of clunky boxish feel. And this was not because, this was partly because that was the coolest thing they could have, but partly because the equipment that was there by that time could not create what we see now. If you look at interiors of the same cars back in the 70s, or even in the 80s, or even in the 90s, on the slide you're probably looking at a car in the 80s, the BMW M3, and it should be. And even if you look at the interiors, what determined what they came up with? the reality is that is what they had. That's what looked good then, and that's the much they could push. Now, jump forward to 2019, and the cars you see right now have curves. They have the focus on aerodynamism has increased, and the stylish elements are, and whatever the designers have had to work with has increased. Now look at the interiors and look at what we're working with in today's age. And I'd like you to focus on the sat-nav, which you should be able to see. I mean, in a world where we can capture very many things, then it makes sense that we'd have a map on our dashboard, and that was not possible then. You use websites or you use apps every day for different things. But these websites, these apps also have grown, they've developed over time, not just in what they're able to do, but also how they look like. And how they look like is important. I mean, earlier I asked you about fashion, I asked you about the house you live in, and the choices you make when you have money. What happens is we enjoy experiences, and we'll talk more about experiences later on. And if we enjoy experiences, we want to have them in the different things we touch and the different things that we interact with. And in our day-to-day world right now, we're interacting with these apps. In a sense, we're in the future. In a sense, we're creating the future because of what we have at our disposal now, where internet is faster, where virtual reality is becoming a big deal. The kind of interfaces we will have reflect that, not out of a plan by someone to force you to interact with surfaces that way, but the reality is we change as times change. But that happens, as we develop different tools, as we develop different gadgets, the interfaces change the same way the tools change, because we have more capabilities, because we are able to do much more, but also we're able to imagine a different future. The same way you right now, if you had money or if you had your way, you'd do something different. Now, think of when Airbnb was starting out. They're one of the biggest competitors at the time, and their first presentation they ever made was Booking.com. And the interface that Booking.com had at that time and what it has right now is different. What Airbnb decided is what they were going to do was sell something slightly different. And I know they've been called disruptors. But one of the reasons they were able to disrupt is because the technologies had jumped forward, and maybe some of the other competitors probably had not were too comfortable to catch up, or for different reasons had not caught up with that. And when they decided to do so, the interface needed to reflect this need to change the market and approach it differently. And as you can see, the first interface they had may not look good, but you can see the difference between that and what Booking.com has, because it's exactly the same here. Now, jump forward a lot, to 2015, and the interface has changed for both companies. But as you look at the Airbnb interface, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? What's the first thing that comes to? For me, it was rest, it was relax. Even without the words feel at home, you can see a large image. The desire is to immerse yourself in that image and just sit in the couch or walk into the room. When you look at the Booking.com website, what's the first thing you think about? I see a market of people selling and shouting and telling me to move, to go, to do something, to act. Whereas finding a place to relax when you're thinking of traveling should be, it's already hectic in your mind, should be easy for you. And therefore, and Airbnb has kept to that to date. You can have a look at the website currently. The idea that you should be made to feel easy. the first tools, there's a meme that has been going around, and it argues that HTML is 28 years old. Yeah, 28 years old. And CSS is 25 years old. And let me just find it. There's a meme that has been going around. It's HTML is 28 years old, CSS is 24 years old, JavaScript is 25 years old. And the comments are the ones that make it to the meme. So one person says, so you're saying HTML was without clothes for 4 years. And someone else says without a brain for 3 years. So when you think of CSS, think of it as clothes for HTML. And the same way clothes are important to us, of course. We like seeing nice things. Is there an economic value to seeing nice things? I would argue yes. I mean, people pay to see nice things. People pay to wear nice things. People pay to feel nice. Think of your business that way. People pay to feel nice about them interacting with your business, as opposed to people paying just to get an item. It's not merely a transaction, or rather a monetary transaction, but also a relationship as well. Over time, CSS has grown, and other than tools like Bootstrap, we've now moved to page builders like Elementor, Divi, Gutenberg. What has happened is these are tools that have been put into the hands of creatives, but more important, non-creatives, for them to be able to build the same way, for them to be able to scale their businesses, for them to be able to start out in some cases. Now, there are some hitches that have come along with them where the implementation is not as, not necessarily creative, but doesn't function in terms of functionality. The implementation hasn't been functional as much as it should be, because if the idea is for people to feel good, then these tools, the way some of them are implemented, create the reverse experience. Think of these tools as cake. So think of this development process as cake. And this is a classic example in how the future is evolving. So initially, people had to get their eggs, their milk, their flour, and mix them up together to come up with what we have as cake. Over time, someone pre-mixed everything so that if you're busy, you're able to still have cake. However, that doesn't mean that it is impossible that just because you have a pre-mixed cake, you'll necessarily come up with the best cake, as you can see. But over time, even this has evolved into something else. In the future, what we'll have is what some economists are calling the experience economy. And by economists, I mean a guy called Joseph Pine and a guy called Joseph Gilmore. I had to use a Harvard quote so that you believe this is smart and stuff. But I'll read it as it is. We expect that experience design will become as much a business art as product design and process design are today. Different design principles are already apparent from the practices and results obtained by companies that have or nearly have advanced into the experience economy. So the idea is every business is fighting against gravity, and for them gravity is commoditization, where you have to compete solely on the basis of price. In the future, people compete on the basis of experience. So the same way some businesses right now are offering services, some businesses are offering goods, some businesses have moved forward to offering an experience to the point where they're being paid just for the experience and not necessarily for the service. So the experience is carrying everything else as opposed to the service carrying the experience. And in a world where this is the case, in a world where it's the experience economy, you have an organization that will not just help you have a pre-mixed cake, but an organization that will come and figure out the entire birthday for you that will come with cake, and will come with snacks, will come with candy, will come with tables and tents and chairs and balloons and all that. And what you'll be paying for is the fact that, one, the convenience brought to you, but ultimately you'll be paying for the experience that your child will have, and in some cases the experience that you will have, where, especially where it's immersive and where you're engaged. Now, this is happening especially in the US with companies like Disney, where the Disney theme park is not being used to sell movies necessarily. It's actually not being used to sell movies. It's become an experience by itself, so people are paying just for that experience, separate from the movies they watch, separate from the merchandise they buy. And this is the future that we'll be walking into. Think of your business. Now, think of communication just in general. We use, let me just confirm the numbers. I think it's 7:55:38. It should be 7:38:55. So 7% of our communication is verbal. The 38 and 55 are split between facial expressions and gestures. The 38 and 55 is basically non-verbal. So if 93%, wow, that took me a while. If 93% of the communication is non-verbal, think of your business and how you communicate. What would be the equivalent of non-verbal communication? If you're a techie, if someone comes to your website and you've just presented them with information, basically that's non-verbal. But if you've added images, but you've made the images in such a way people can have different reactions to the content that you're putting out there, that would be the 93%. Now, in the experience economy, that's where things are getting into, where it's personalized to different people, where experiences are staged, where you're not merely offering a service, but you're staging an experience so that when someone leaves, they believe they come back for that particular experience. What would be the equivalent of that for tech? And then at this point, it's important I give a trigger warning for some of you out there who may be affected by this. So you can skip to the next slide. Specifically, I was talking about Arsenal fans. I apologized in advance. Now, for the English Premier League, it's easy for you to go to the website, and the website is well done. It's really well done. You get there and the colors are bright and vivid, and they make you feel alive. They give you that boost of energy. And it captures the fact that there are many different teams, and it gives you information about how the different teams are playing, and it gives you information on the latest news affecting different teams. And this is all good. And I mean, I hope that most of you in your businesses aim to give such an experience when providing information. But moving into the experience economy, we'll move to the next slide, where we have the Fantasy Premier League, which has millions of people all over the world, might even be 1 billion, where people are engaging with the Premier League, but beyond just consuming information, they're interacting. They're playing a game. That means you are, what's the word I'm looking for? So by creating a game, the Fantasy Premier League, you're immersed in the experience. You feel like you have a stake, there's a stake in the game. You're watching the game hoping a player, and in this case, it doesn't have to be a player from your team. If you think about it, this is how they get you. This is how the system gets you. You want to know how Stoke City performed or how Bournemouth performed, and this is not necessarily your favorite team, but because you chose one player who might be good and you want the points, you are engaged in the entire league. This is the future, and we're using tools that are now at our disposal. As I said, we keep developing and changing based on what we are able to do. And in this case, as we move into the future with faster internet, with virtual reality, it is possible for us to create entire experiences for our consumers. Think of your business as Think of your experience, your yeah, I'm okay, I'm fine. So think of your business, whether you're offering goods or services. Start thinking of it as, if you were to offer an experience, how would that look like? How would you go about it? If you wanted an experience from your business, how would that look like? And start making tweaks and changes. Now, other than the experience economy, one of the schools of thought from in design. So when I say the experience economy is the future, I don't mean some far off place. This is already happening. There's an organization called the Geek Squad where you have IT guys showing up in a parody of an ad and offering services, and people are paying just for the experience of someone showing up with, tucked in shirt and all that. But one of the things that the experience economy focuses on is the person. It's the person who's consuming, it's the person who is buying, it's the person who is being marketed at. And this is shared with design thinking, the idea that when there's a problem, you don't just offer the easiest, fastest solution that can fix it in a short-term way, but focus on the entire solution, entire process that will solve the problem. And this is where design thinking comes in. But I'm bringing in design thinking for you to keep in mind the fact that it focuses on the person. There's this case study where the proponent of design thinking was brought on board to help an organization that was selling bicycles. And they were worried about sales not having grown. So the first thing he did, and thank God for this particular client, is he did his research. And in the process found out that the culture of biking had changed over time, but also people had changed over time. And the first things he did was, based on the research he had done, was lobby together with other companies, competitors, and other organizations, the government. He lobbied the government to create bicycle parts. The second thing was to create marketing campaigns to encourage people to cycle more. And the third thing, which was now directly tied to the business, was he found out that most people missed the nostalgic experience of just picking a simple bike and going for a simple ride, as opposed to what has become, even in Nairobi, what has become sort of like a cult where you need to get this gear, and the gear is expensive, and this particular bike with its complex controls. And he realized that most people just said for them, they wanted that simple experience of biking. And if you grew up in Kenya, and especially rural areas, so that's a simple blackie that you take and you move and you from point A to point B. And that was the best thing about that. So for him, design thinking was this entire process of solving a problem that at first seemed like a sales problem that needed to be given, that all the person needed to do was throw money at creating an advert. Now, if you think of your business as an experience, then how would you like that experience to be? Microsoft have a design language called Fluent, but it's not just Microsoft. Google have had material design, and car makers are having different design languages. And when I think of design language, it may seem like this philosophical thing that designers and artists and purists sit down to, think about. But design language has a utility, a functionality to it. But more importantly, it's the focus on the person to give the person a certain experience. When I told someone, one of the things I do is UI UX design, and they asked me, what's UI UX design? I was like, I told them it's how you interact with surfaces, and they said, yeah, I get it. It's the same way when I interact with, I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to name names. When I interact with Netflix versus interact with Showmax is very frustrating. I get frustrated. When people think of design, it's not just limited to things looking good, but there's a functional element to it. And the functional element is focused on the person. It's it's observing how the person is using a product. It's taking care of the frustrations. And templates that have come up, the ones that I mentioned earlier, and the ones that are coming up that are supposed to help non-designers to create more, sort of have the responsibility to ensure that this experience is maintained. That this experience is maintained, so that ultimately what people are creating, whether they're designers or not designers, is functional, is stylish, relates to with them, they're able to customize it without taking away the functionality, without taking away the experience that the user is supposed to have. And hopefully you'll be able to come up with something that looks like this. This is a filmmaker from Kenya who had a movie that was nominated for an Oscar, if I'm not wrong, called Katikati, as opposed to something that looks like this, which is one of the government websites where information is just being thrown at you. Now, think about it. In terms of what you do, in the field you're in, where are we now? What tools do we have? And who are we making things for? And are we making things with the tools that we have for the problems that we have right now? And are those things enjoyable? Are they giving people an experience? Thank you.